Does God do miracles just because God wants to be nice? If that's the case, we could ask there's a lot of times why God didn't do miracles in other situations. We will revisit that a little bit more in detail at another day. But one of the reasons that God did miracles was to confirm his word and to confirm the ministry of some of the people that he sent with a service, to do a service. One of these men was by the name of Elisha. Elisha was a prophet in Samaria. Samaria is that land in which you had the 10 northern tribes after God divided the land and gave the 10 northern tribes to Rehoboam, and Rehoboam in very short order set the people to idolatry by making them worship calves because he was afraid that these people would revert back to the house of David if they had to go to Jerusalem and worship. God assured Rehoboam he didn't have to worry about that, but he did. And so many years afterwards, after the 10 northern tribes had been greatly involved in idolatry of many, many forms, God sends first Elijah and then Elisha, his men, his prophets. And these men, as they talk to these northern tribes and tell them what God wants them to do and what they shouldn't do, and advise them how to make things right, he confirms many ways events. We have one here in the first part of 2 Kings chapter 2, in which this city where Elisha was, that the water was bad, and he simply says, bring me some salt. They throw the salt into the water, and the water was purified, or it was made healthy, and there wasn't any death anymore. So the waters have been purified or made healthy to this day. The day whoever the copyist or the person that was recording these events for 2 Kings when he wrote, it was still true at that time. We move on to chapter 4 in 2 Kings, and we have a woman of the wives of the prophets cried out to Elisha, your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. So this was a man that had served with Elisha, and his wife now is asking for help. You need to do something because he's going to take my children away. He's going to put him into slave to pay off my debts. And he says, go get as many vessels you have. You have one thing in the house. You got some oil in a pot. And he says, go and collect as many vessels as you can. Go to your neighbors and collect more vessels, and go into a room and start pouring oil. Make sure the door's shut to assure that nobody else is sneaking oil in the door. And with the door shut, she goes in and she pours oil. And as she's doing so, it says, and when the vessels were full, she's filled all these vessels. She said to her son, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, there's not one vessel more. And the oil stopped. And then she came and told the man of God, that's Elisha, and he said, go sell the oil, pay your debt. You and your sons can live on the rest. So they poured out enough oil out of one pot. This is supernatural, mind you. You can't just take a pot and just endlessly pour oil out of it. Not only sufficient oil to pay off a debt, the debt sufficient that this man felt that he needed to take this woman's sons to work as slaves to pay off the debt, but also to have extra that they could go on living, so they didn't have to get more debt to survive, which was very important. It says, then there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem, and there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food, and she takes care of him. Now, she has a husband, and she tells her husband, this is a holy man, let's build him a place. And they do all this kind stuff, feeding him all the time. And it comes to verse 13, he said to her, say now to her, behold, you have been careful with us. And this word careful, you can't see it down here in the Hebrew in verse 13. You have been careful. Oops, I still missed it. Let's see if I can get it to come down here. This word here, to be careful, that he's talking about is that you have treated us with a type of fear. And you've been very just meticulous, wanting to make sure everything is right. And all of this then with this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army? In other words, I can ask favors of these other people. And she says, well, I live among these people. I don't need anything else. But she says, truly, his answer is, truly, she has no son, and her husband is old. So he called her and said to her, at this season, next year, you're going to have a son. And so verse 17, the woman conceived and bore a son. So she had been without a child. They were aging, and there wasn't really any prospect that she was going to have a child. This is supernatural, that they conceived. I mean, they're conceived in normal means, but supernaturally it's made possible in this way. We move down to verse 18 of this same chapter. And let me go back, sorry. It says, the woman conceived and bore a son. And then verse 18, and when the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reaper. So he's old enough to leave his mother, but his head hurts. They bring him back to his mom. He sits on his lap until noon and died. She sends for Elisha. And when we get to the end of the story, as Elisha comes in, he goes into the room, stretches himself out on top of the corpse, puts his mouth to his mouth, his eyes to his eyes, his hands on his hands, and the boy becomes warm. He leaves the room, walks around the house, comes and does this one more time, and the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi, that's his servant, and said, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came into him, he said, take up your son. And she went in, fell down at his feet, bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. And so we have this provision that God's providing here for somebody that has cared for him and cared for his people, for these other servants that have been there, but primarily for him, that he provided not only her a son supernaturally, but then gave the son life again after the son had died. We have a situation in which we have some poisonous soup. There was famine in the land. The prophets gather some gourds. They can't eat it anymore because they know it's going to make them sick. He says, take some meal, ground grain, whatever it is, throw it in there, into this pot that was going to bring them death. And they do that, and says, and there was no harm in the pot. So they're going to eat this, and they start eating it going, oh, this is going to make us sick. We're going to be really sick, and yet this was what we had for food. And now it's no good because it's got these gourds in it. They throw the grain in it, and I can guarantee you, you don't make something that's made with some gourds that are going to make you really, really sick, which in a famine, getting sick is going to be even worse because now you can't digest food, and you're going to lose some of what you were even trying to maintain. And this is all healed by throwing grain in the soup? It doesn't happen unless it's supernatural, that God caused this to happen. The last one to look at is Naaman, the captain of the king of Aram, of the army of the king of Aram. He is a military leader, but he is a leper. And there's a girl that works in there that knows about Elisha, and she says, oh, that you were with the prophet who is in Samaria. He could heal you. He could cure you of this leprosy. And so Naaman goes down there, and one of the things that happens in there, in all of these things that happen, is that Elisha says to a messenger sent to him, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored. But Naaman gets angry, and he goes, why in the world would I bathe in that? He says, aren't there good rivers up in Damascus? Let me go and bathe in one of these Damascus rivers. And his servants say, hey, if he told you to do a great thing, wouldn't you do a great thing? Do this small thing. Go bathe in the river Jordan. And he washes, verse 14, dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And when he returned to the man of God with all his company, all the rest of this army that travels with him, all these attendants, he came and stood before him and said, behold, now I know that there is no God in all of Israel, or in all the earth, but in Israel. And he's going to offer him a present which Elisha will refuse. But the significance of this is God confirmed this person Elisha, this prophet. He confirmed what Elisha was doing here, even to a non-Israeli, to an Aramean, one of the enemies of Israel, makes him clean of leprosy. And this man realizes there is only one God, and it's the God in Israel. That's amazing because in reality, Israel was worshiping idols at this time. This man realized that there is a true God among here too, even though these people are ignoring him, or many of the people, not everybody. Elisha's not, and the prophets are with him. And we know there's some other accounts of some others that were true, but largely these northern tribes, Israel was in dire straits. But God was confirming this fact in all of these things, that God was standing behind what he had said, what he had promised to these people, and that there was, if they would recognize it, even as this Aramean does, that there is no God in all of the earth except the one true God. In this case, that one true God was the God of Israel. That's something that you and I as believers need to grasp, that we need to come to appreciate, that there is just one true God. Because it's easy for us. We practice idolatry, the New Testament tells us, by being greedy for other things. We think a new house is going to make us happy, then a new car is going to make us happy, then a new vacation is going to make us happy, then new clothes are going to make us happy. Fill in the blank, that something, we're going to get something, and that's going to solve the problem. And that's idolatry, and that is replacing the one true God with stuff, with acquiring things. Maybe it's an education. Maybe you think that education is going to solve all of your problems, but in reality, the one true God's the only one that can solve our problems. And you know, as a New Testament believer, when we appreciate something that Naaman, this Aramean military general, had to learn, when we grasp this also, and we live our lives in light of the fact that there is only one true God, it's one of the things that helps us have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me today.